Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much again for joining me here. Hope you're having a great day. Lower timeframes here for Bitcoin are looking a little bit on the overextended side with low volume on a weekend. I don't really trust this little continuation here so far. We do, however, have some macro structure bottoming potential here, likely a good ascending type of channel as well as a bullish convergence on the RSI. So we're going to pay attention to that, but there's no doubt that all sectors are doing quite well here. HBAR, Zcash, Flare, Bitunix, MYX, XMR, Crowcoin. A lot of coins are 10 plus here on the charts as far as profit for the day. So make sure you secure some profits. I wouldn't expect the price just to continue higher. We're in a descending trend still, folks. We want to make sure that breaks first before we get too ahead of ourselves. Liquidation and open interest, specifically above the price action. There's an order block to at 88,000 we want to pay attention to. And of course, stablecoin dominance pulling back with Bitcoin dominance and altcoin dominance increasing while Ethereum is kind of running sideways. So interesting stuff here. We're going to take a closer look. Be sure to stick around. Let's take a look. All right, folks, starting with the obvious, hitting the like button, commenting below if you get a chance. Really appreciate you doing that. Don't forget to enable alerts just so you can stay on top of the videos I provide daily. Generally, it's roughly the same time, but it's helpful to be notified there because I generally have 1 to 3 new videos per day, and some are altcoins, some are meme coins. In this case, more so specifically Bitcoin and a handful of alts. So take a look here, just to quickly clarify, once again, the sectors are moving pretty well. Bitcoin and Ethereum are decent here, even though ETH dominance is decreasing. That's just comparative because most money is flowing into Bitcoin right now, or we can see zero bounce or continuation here for stablecoin right there at that 8.5% range if you exclude altcoin dominance. But all that being said here, things are on the up and up for the day, right? So trying not to get too it's kind of just a friendly reminder. What goes up must come down. I'm not proposing that we're going to go down specifically very far, but I think that we're going to have some resistance coming up here soon. Those are highlighted here on the order blocks. 88,000 is that largest order of resistance. Same with 87.5. So we continue to progress up to 88K. There's a solid chance we're going to see some slowing pressure there, just because there's a lot of selling opportunities in that range. And when you kind of see that, then you can see stablecoin dominance pulling back with altcoin dominance increasing. It's generally favorable, right? Money's flowing away from stablecoin and going into altcoins and Bitcoin, and not so much ETH, of course, but once more, that's just kind of paled in comparison to the dominance for Bitcoin increasing just based on the overall, market capitalization there. All that said, though, liquidation on the daily time frame here is pretty close, but we're seeing a lot upwards of 88,000. So it would be safe to presume 88K is the next stop here, based on momentum and just that getting so close, right? So there's a lot of folks shorting that level. I get it. I'm interested in a short too, but with liquidation being above the price here so far, there's a lot also on the macro structure. I think there's a decent chance we get a push towards 88 to 90,000 possibly today. It is a weekend, again, low volume. Things get kind of weird when that happens, but I wouldn't be surprised by it. Okay, but just know 90,000 is our original shorting target. That's where we wanted to take a short a few days ago before the price pulled back even further. So it may be a good consideration. We'll take a look at that today too. So I'm not trying to get you to think more bearishly here. I just want to be realistic. It's a descending trend. We're still establishing lower highs and lower lows from Bitcoin on the macro. Until that changes, we got to presume that's going to continue. Fear and greed index is still super low, so there's a strong chance that this continuation is some whales pushing the price action higher there. We'll double check the fair value gaps too, see if there are any. As a matter of fact, I forgot to pull that up. Let's see if we can get that going here. CME futures. Let's see. So Ethereum, Bitcoin left off at 85.3, so we could see once again a pullback because we're closer to 87K right now. And same thing here with ETH, we're at 27.70. ETH is at 28.33, and then Solana 2 also 132, previously closed at 129. So once more, these are not guarantees. They don't happen right away, but these are some gaps starting to form here. So it'd be safe to presume that Bitcoin may pull back to the 85K range, Ethereum 27.80, and roughly 129 for Solana, right? So not saying you should short those levels, and just letting you know that those would maybe be better considerations for longs once those levels are established, or more so retested and a range is established. I mentioned to my community here to kind of hold off on trading for the moment, at least this weekend, just to be on the safe side, because the price action was terrible yesterday morning. Obviously, it's gotten a little bit better since then, but we're seeing a double overextension here on the hourly with 2 8s on TD sequential. low, basically implying we've been moving in the same direction for roughly, 24 hours without any correction. Granted, this is the hourly time frame, so we'll double check some other time frames and kind of confirm that, but let's go ahead and look at the larger time frames here too, just to kind of give some perspective. Once more, daily time frame fear and greed index is still super low or high to the downside, if you will, which is not generally favorable. Let's look at we're going to look at open interest for the lower time frames here, just to kind of reiterate and reaffirm if there is any type of resistance here locally. You can see 88K is kind of an outlier there, along with 90K. So I think 88 to 90,000 is that local resistance here for us. We'll look on the charts too as well, but if I recall correctly, those were previous support ranges and essentially going to be a new resistance for us, at least initially for the first test. All that said though, we got a decent amount of open interest at 85,400. That's right there at that CME gap. So it would make sense for the price to pull back to that level. So if you're going to consider a short on Bitcoin, I would recommend taking profits before 85.5, right? Just right in that range there. Just that way, if that CME gap does get filled, you're in and out without being a super aggressive trader. And nothing wrong with being super aggressive per se if you have good risk tolerance, but most people don't have good risk tolerance if they are aggressive traders. And an aggressive trader, I would say, is just somebody that uses larger leverage and somebody that's kind of jumping in, jumping out, a little more on the day trading side of things. I used to be that, honestly. I enjoyed it. It was fun for a little while, but I can tell you what, it put some gray hairs on your head or some white hairs on your beard, right? Anyways, all that said, daily time frame for Bitcoin, we'll look at that next, but the 1 month looks like there's majority liquidation here locally been swept. Let's look at the last 7 days, see where we're at for liquidation on Bitcoin. And just to kind of clarify, there's a lot more above than below, okay? It's kind of sporadic, of course. Obviously, you can see it highlighted over here a little bit easier on the 7 day, just kind of give you some perspective. Bigger chunks between 88 and 89,000. So those are more the important ones to kind of pay attention to here. But from an overall perspective there, big picture, we're getting closer to an overextended state. We can see double extensions or overextensions on the hourly. The 4 hour has a 7 here, effectively telling us we've been moving once more 24 hours in the same direction without recourse. And generally speaking, you'll see 36 hours of continuation in the same direction. So if 88,000 is hit, that seems like a very logical consideration for a short to me, based on what we've seen here so far. There's also fair value gaps below the price, as well as CMA gaps too. So daily time frame, once more here, just taking a look. So you've got this significant overcorrection, right? We are at a 9 on TD sequential 3 days ago, and we moved even further down. So we had that super aggressive candle wick Thursday night, Friday morning, that essentially stopped us out of our Bitcoin long. Thankfully, we secured profits on our Solana long before that. But what I'm bringing that up for is because we have a massive overextension here. We got our price moving average range percentile here. It's common for price action to recover like this, right? So I'm expecting a little bit further upside. I would be careful shorting just yet, but I think 88 to 90K seems like a very logical consideration there. Jumping on to the 3 day time frame, just kind of give you a quick perspective before we round this out here for Bitcoin. We do have some good history here. We can see we're hitting that 30 level on the RSI. And anytime we come close to 30 on the RSI, we've seen bullish convergences to follow and the price action to recover. Right? So generally speaking, the price is more likely to go higher here in the relative near future. I'm not thinking immediately, but somewhat soon, we should be able to see that convergence here with a bullish convergence on the RSI there. Once more on the 3 day time frame, kind of indicative of this previous ascending channel. Okay. Once more, we're seeing these higher low patterns still being established, even though we did technically wick down to this 81 to 80K range. We haven't broken below our local low here recently, which is good. Okay. And if we do take a look at just kind of the larger timeframes here, I want to give you some perspective on support levels. We can see from previous weekly closures, there is previous weekly closure 86K, so closing above that today is extremely important. Same thing here as well with 78K. With our previous bottom here in the last descending trend, that's where we had the largest amount of fear in the market when Trump was shaking things up in the market. And then, of course, 71.5K prior to that, back in March, of course, March to roughly November of 24. That was a good 9 months of consolidation where the price action was kind of stuck on stupid in this descending type of broadening wedge pattern. pattern. Okay, so basically came down as low as what, 50K, and ran up to about 100K no less than 2 or 3 months later. So that's kind of where we're at there. Just from a macro perspective, if the price continues to pull back, those are good DCA targets. Between now and then, let's go ahead and see what happens here first. I think 88K is on the docket here for Bitcoin, and if I see that, 88 to 90,000 will be a decent average entry consideration for a short position to that the fair value and or CME gap down below, closer to 85. All right, let's take a look at some altcoins next. All right, folks, let's go and jump on into the Ethereum chart. And just before we do, let's take a look at the backend data and kind of double check some important stuff here. So pull up the right charts, make sure we got the right info for us. And when we looked at Ethereum, what was it? 3750 was that area of open interest. Sorry, 2750 rather. That is the current support range for us. We do end up pulling back. Once more, that's right where that CME gap is forming, really close to it. Right? I think that's like 2780 that we looked at for the price action there for that lower range of the CME futures closing on Friday. They're going to reopen here soon, and ideally, basically creating a CME gap. All that said, that's a good consideration for a long if we were to see that area is retested. Once more, consideration for a short right now is getting closer. We're going to double check some levels, but 3,000 key level resistance as well as 2,900. Those are two ranges that we want to pay attention to here for ETH. Same thing here with liquidation delta is tapering off. Finally, we're starting to see some price action moving. Where yesterday it was kind of running flat. It was pretty bad. Nobody wanted to trade yesterday. Now at this point, when we take a look here, 2,800, we got some liquidation above the price. Obviously, it's in the $2,900 to $3,000 range. If we zoom in a little closer, though, let's look at the last 3 days is less the weekend's worth of liquidation. We can get some perspective here that there's definitely a big chunk at 2,930. So 2 or 3 billion right there at 2,930. So a wick up to the 2,930 to the 3,000 range is a very practical consideration here for Ethereum. So let's take a look here at the daily time frame, just kind of get some perspective. There isn't going to be a whole heck of a lot of shifts in momentum here per se. We're mainly going to want to focus on the lower time frames and the comparison with this coin and Bitcoin. That's generally what I like to do when coins start to move, and we can kind of pick or identify some outliers and see if those coins may be worth taking trades on. All that said, though, just from a 4-hour time frame, we can see we're breaking above our 20-day SMA, which is good. Money flow index is increasing. It seems quite significant and shooting up, but that's only because these candles are dropping off, right? So try not to be misinterpreted here and to think that money's flowing into this coin. It's really not. It's just that the last 14 candles, we're starting to see that drop off of that selling pressure. So the RSI is going up. Exactly why you want to be very careful using a money flow index or a market cipher on the weekends, because that can give you some false positives. Needless to say, that's positive to have the money flow index above the price, but it's also not super indicative that ETH is back on track. RSI is still under 50. I think that's the takeaway here. We still haven't broken that local resistance. You can see we've been stuck under 50 since November 13th for the last 10 days. So not really awesome. I do like to see a convergence there on the MACD, but it's kind of once more a false positive. And we can see here if we compare these two coins that Bitcoin is performing better than ETH, right? It's not dramatically different. It's really pretty much a very similar price action. We can, of course, see that when Bitcoin pulls back by a small margin, Ethereum does pull back a little bit harder. So we got that 1.5x to the downside as a rough estimate. So the simple way to understand it here is ETH's moving very synonymous with Bitcoin right now. Not necessarily the greatest coin to trade, but once more from previous timeframes, just macro structure and psychological resistances, we can see here we're right there at 2825 as a potential bottom or top for us, but more specifically, 2,900 was an open interest range here recently, and 3,000 equally as much, but also stronger in a lot of ways because it's got that psychological resistance. So oftentimes you'll see sell pressure entering and buying pressure, of course, at key level round numbers. And 3,000 is the one of the biggest round number we can find here on Ethereum locally. All right, so that's kind of where that is Ethereum in a nutshell. If you're looking for a new exchange or possibly just want to help support the channel, Bitunix has got you covered. We've been partnered with this exchange for over 2 years. It's been our fan favorite for our community, and the reason why is because they take really good care of you. They offer trading reward bonuses as well as a reduction in fees. Best exchange I would recommend at this point. Link down below for more information. All right, taking a quick look here at Solana. Let's go ahead and double check Solana and kind of see where we're at here. Solana is an interesting one here. This coin has always done very well to recover. The 125 to 130 range is held like a champ. So let's go ahead and double check and kind of see where we're at here on Solana. So open interest for the last 7 days. We can see a lot of interest here, roughly at 130, as well as 125. Keep in mind the CME gap that we looked at here is right there at 129. So I'd say 130, if we were to retest that range, that'd be a good consideration for a long, just kind of shooting from the hip here, because of the fact that Solana would effectively be retesting or filling that CMA gap in the low 130s to upper 129. All that said, liquidation delta is still quite high, high to the downside rather, but it's tapering off, which is generally favorable. It tells us there's a shift in momentum that may be happening here soon. A little bit of liquidation left upwards of about 138, so that could be the better case scenario for us. Keep in mind 138 was that previous, really close to that previous point of control for that local range here in the last 7 days. So that is an important area to kind of pay attention to. I think we're going to see some resistance there, and you can kind of see this reflected here as well, right? 143 is that upper range if we look at the 4-hour time frame of that previous channel. So even though we did kind of pull back here, there's a good chance that we do see 144, 143 as that local resistance, with once more 142 as that specific point of control on the 4-hour. So there's a lot of resistance above us is pretty much what I'm trying to say. We still have yet to break this descending trend and break above the 50-day SMA. Oftentimes the descending trends run consistent with SMAs. That's how I like to draw them out. So this one here is consistent there, basically letting us know that we still haven't broken bullish, but we have some early indications that that shift in momentum is happening. We're getting above 50 in the RSI, and once more money flow index is increasing, but that's not really all that indicative at this point. If we look at a side-by-side comparison here with Solana and Bitcoin, we can see very similar price action, nothing super significant. Both coins are overextending themselves a little bit on the hourly time frame, and just kind of zooming out here, there's not a whole heck of a lot to really identify here for these two coins when we compare them. They're very similar in a lot of ways too. So while I love Solana and it's a good coin to trade, it's not outperforming or underperforming versus Bitcoin, which I would say is probably a good sign right now. But the truth is, even though we're kind of transitioning towards this power of 3, and we very well could see the price continue to run, we've got to get through this 140 to 144 range here as a close approximate. Just say 145 is a local resistance before we can have some confidence the price is going to go much higher. Once more, we've constantly been faked out in the entire market where these levels here, these local highs, are consistent rejection spots, right? So I wouldn't see this being any different until the overall trend changes. You're better off betting against this coin here, if you will, and the fact that it should reject in those levels. We also have that CME gap below the price too. So ideally, in a perfect world, we pull back a little bit here today and tomorrow for Bitcoin, and then we rally and ramp back up from 85K plus for Bitcoin, and then of course here 130 or higher for Solana. But there's no doubt that adding to your spot bag between 125 and 130 is a good call. I've been doing that myself personally. So those are just my thoughts, of course. Everyone differs on that, but for the most part here, that's kind of where we're at there for Solana. All right, jumping on over to SUI. Let's go ahead and double check some stuff here. SUI is pretty much still in the doghouse. I don't see anything like super amazing with this coin. In fact, it looks underwhelming versus Bitcoin, specifically getting stuck in its range here. This can oftentimes be a bearish type of pattern where the price action works itself into a channel, essentially a bearish type of channel. And this bearish rectangle generally breaks to the downside, especially if Bitcoin were to pull back. So hypothetically, shorting SUI at 140 seems like a logical consideration based on the current range that it's established. Right? So that's kind of the overall bumper sticker version there for SUI. But let's just quickly do our due diligence and double check the current areas here. So 135, 140 open interest ranges. If we happen to break out of 140 and progress higher, 150, once more, this coin is pretty consistent every 10 cents, that we have a lot of resistance there based on open interest. That previous low likely to work as a new high at 150. So if I see 150 and Bitcoin at 90,000, I'm going to probably short 150 on SUI and short 90,000 for Bitcoin. That's kind of the narrative that we're seeing here right now. The concept, though, is that liquidation delta hasn't shifted or changed at all. There's still just as many bears now as there was yesterday or the day before. And that's not good because you see the rest of the market recovering and this coin's doing nothing. So that's just not really the greatest thing. It still leads me to believe that this significant chunk of liquidation between 120 and 130 is due to get hit next. So if I see 120 for SUI and then Bitcoin pull back to 85,000, I'd be happy to take a long in those places, right? So we're kind of in the middle of a range right now where it's generally best not to try to trade or force a trade in either direction. Bitcoin, maybe a different story there. We're really close to resistance there, but for a lot of altcoins, they haven't broken free from the ranges yet. So as a range-bound trader, if you're going to do that, you would want to just continue to work within the range that's provided. Okay, so I'll update some of these charts here, of course, and get them out on social media, but for the most part, we are looking at a pretty terrible situation for SUI. There's no other way around it. There's nothing that's hidden or amazing here. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. There's just is total trash, especially when you compare it with Bitcoin. Bitcoin broke free from its local high at 85.2. That's where the CME gap is, by the way. But SUI still has yet to do so itself at 140. Just know if you see a breakout above 140, 150 is a solid consideration for a short. And make sure you secure profit somewhere in this range here, because I don't think SUI is going to break free from 150 anytime soon, unless Bitcoin really starts running towards 100K. And I think we're a long ways away from that just yet. Still too early to tell. All right, those are my thoughts on SUI. What are yours? All right, taking a quick look here at XRP, quickly double checking some important stuff here. These are some levels here from yesterday, of course, but this descending trend line is being broken, depending on how you look at it, of course, from the previous lower high pattern. Now, while we have established higher highs on the lower time frames here, we're still not above that 50-day SMA, right? So to me, XRP hasn't truly broken out yet. If we compare it with Bitcoin, we are seeing that it's doing quite well versus Bitcoin, though. So this is a very, very good sign. A pretty significant retest, this local high of 206, and likely to break out and continue higher, right? Just keep in mind, Bitcoin very well should pull back a little bit, and if so, XRP may do so as well. But this coin is super strong in the $2 range. I would not try to bet against it. You're better off considering longs on this coin and not really looking for short positions. All that being said, though, open interest below the price, 203 respectively. That's been a macro support level for us for a very long time. And then, of course, 191 secondary to that if the price pulls back a bit further. Liquidation delta, unlike other coins right now, is approaching break even. That's usually a good sign for a continuation higher. If we take a look here as well, we can see a ton of liquidation above the price between 215 and 220 and a specific area here at 209. So I would be very surprised if XRP discontinues its run towards those ranges there and doesn't hit that 220 level in the relative near future. It's just difficult to want to jump into a trade right now when things are running on a Sunday. It just feels kind of like, feels weak, right? We look at the volume, it's still pretty low, even though our money flow index is still moving higher. It's still not a good sign because we have previous selling pressure that's factoring in. But the RSI is over 50, right? MACD is converging. There's a lot of positivity here, generally speaking, with this coin. Just note, again, we're going to be entering a resistance range between 215 and 220. If you see the previous low here at 217, that kind of communicates to us here that we got some resistance in this range coming up, okay? So try not to get super greedy. Don't be taking a long with high leverage to the, to $3. It's just not the right way to go. Trust me on this for one, folks. XRP will likely reject out of the local high. It's pretty consistent at those round numbers. I'm thinking 220 is the local high for us, but between now and then, I'd be more than happy to see a long consideration in the low $2 range. I would not recommend shorting this coin, though, once more. That's kind of the common theme here. This coin's looking pretty strong. Just be very careful holding on too long. All right, those are my thoughts. Thanks again so much for watching, folks. Look forward to working with you. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you in the next one.